Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Think No More. I guess the Neurospicy podcast is what I'm going to start calling it. Today, I have someone with me whose story really interested me. Because he's kind of seen SEND from both sides of the fence. So Adam Petrie is a teacher. He's worked with children who are neurodiverse, special education needs, and he was diagnosed with ADHD himself. He's now the founder of a product called Learnella and the man behind Early Signals. What really caught my attention, though, and which is why I've brought him on the podcast, is the problem he's trying to solve. Often, somebody noticed something isn't quite right, which is good these days, right? A teacher sees something, for example, a parent may see something, the child's struggling. But what we need is all of those pieces of information, they all sit in different places. And sometimes it takes probably years before anybody joins the bloody dots together. And Adam's trying to change that. So before we get anywhere near Early Signals, I want to find a bit more about Adam. So Adam, thank you for joining us on the podcast. It's amazing to see you, my friend.
Good morning, Jay. Thank you so much for having me on, mate. Really excited.
You're very welcome. Now listen, doesn't matter who you are, right? You can be a superstar or you can be Joe Blogs off the street. It makes no difference. Every single person, even if you're a teacher, my friend, gets this question, right? It's the same question. So I want you to imagine you're about to walk into a room, the doors fling open and a song starts playing. What's your song?
It's The Middle by Jimmy Eat World. Absolute banger.
Wow. Okay. All right. Why, mate? Is there a memory attached to that or a reason?
Do you know what it is, mate? It was the first song that popped into my head. And then I told my other half about it and she went, right, okay, that's good advertising. What do you mean? She went, well, you've got an article out called The Missing Middle. And I was like, right, okay, well, we'll link to that. I mean, look, it does kind of epitomise my life, really. It's all about being stuck in the middle of the ride, but, you know, everything's going to be all right. You know, your middle, no matter kind of how tumultuous it is, gets you to your end point, right? Like, no matter how hard it was, no matter how easy it was, you know, you've still got to go through that middle. And it's also quite synonymous in terms of what we're doing with Early Signals. You know, someone notices something at the start, you've got all that missing middle in the middle where there's nothing that kind of supporting people just now. And then at the very end, you've got all that useful evidence. So we're all in the middle of something, mate.
No, totally. And it's really a really great tune. It really is. It's a banger, like you said. But what is quite interesting about that is what you just kind of talked about being in the middle. The reason I started this was because I know there are people listening now, and the vast majority of them are parents. And they are at that point. Some of them at the beginning of that journey, some of them are in the middle, and some of them are near the end, and they can see the light at the end of the tunnel. But it kind of epitomizes what this podcast is about. So, right, listen, I want to paint a picture here. So I want to go back to Adam at school. I want you to tell me what Adam was like at school.
You know, something, mate. I tried making a few notes on this, and it's been quite painful, actually. You know, there were bits of it that have been really quite hard to do. If I think back kind of really early doors, I think the whole overriding kind of narrative is that I just wanted to be a lad who was liked. You know, I think that was kind of it. I was relatively bright, you know, so it's an odd one, right? I know we're on a podcast called Thick No More, but I don't think I was ever thick. I just think, you know, I was desperate for validation from people. I remember being called Walter Mitty when I was young, you know, there was a teacher I had, like nice man, but he kind of like off the cuff to an, oh, you like Walter Mitty, you know. But actually, when I think now I know who that is, you know, it's like, you know, compulsive lying, and it's kind of attention seeking, and those words really still echo in my ear now. You know, verbal diarrhea echoes in my ear now. I remember kind of I would just get sent out of the class. I had one teacher who would literally say, you know, Adam, you know, you've got one, and I'd shout out once, and then as soon as I'd shout out the second time, he'd send me out. Right. And now when I think back on it, like, that's just quite poor behaviour management, but, you know, it's the 90s, right? And I remember always, nearly always anyway, standing outside that classroom because it gets sent out 5, 6 times a lesson. Why the hell have I done that again? And kind of, I didn't think, I just did things. It was total impulse. And then kind of as I got a bit older and I got a bit bigger, I started doing bigger and dafter things. I was really easily led, mate. I made some poor choices. And obviously when you're little or when you're younger, they're just little things, right? You say silly things. I remember giving my mum the finger outside of a shop up near where we used to live in Sunderland, and I remember her turning around and like the world just slowing down, and like she came back to the car, and it was just it was just like such a silly thing. But I mean, I think the main thing that I really want to get across is back then I just was desperate to be liked and kind of.
Yeah.
Now I think about it, I just wanted the dopamine hit from like people sort of saying nice things about something that was going on. Now it's been 8 months, 9 months since I finished titration, started my treatment proper. I'm telling you now, I don't chase validation from anybody at all. It's a really odd thing, mate.
Interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah. Again, there was something I'd forgotten about, mate, which is really, I think, quite traumatic, actually, which I hadn't really remembered, right? So I was on report, right, in secondary school, yeah? So I had a little card where a teacher would either put a tick or a cross, depending on my behaviour, right? Then that changed to something called a monitoring book. I remember the book. It was like a school exercise book, and the teacher would like write a comment every single lesson about how I'd done. And you'd hand it in at the start of every lesson. You'd walk in a class with everyone else. You'd walk to the front of the classroom. You'd put it on the desk, and then you'd collect it at the end. And invariably, there'd be really quite naff comments in it because the behaviour didn't change because it was being logged. Right, the behaviour never changed. There was just nothing ever. There was no support ever put in place for me, like ever. I don't remember any kind of conversation. There was no kind of pastoral. There was nothing. Right. I think it was just kind of believe that I was just a bit of a nugget, I spoke to Mum the other day about my reports, and I was like, Mum, can I get my reports out, my old reports out? And they're kind of lost in the ether in the loft. But her overriding thing was just, has lots of ability, but he's a class clown, And I think.
So did they ever see? Do you think they ever saw what you were capable of, or not? The teachers.
Yeah. And I think sometimes I think, I've listened to a lot of people on this pod. Sorry, you'll have to forgive me, the gentleman with who's broken the world records.
Yeah, Andy Stone.
Andy, yes, thank you. Sorry. I was listening and it was kind of like, just being unable to kind of access what you're capable of. That's the overriding thing for him, right? He's done incredible things. I haven't yet, right? I'm coping and I'm managing my life and I'm doing the little things right, which is more important to me right now, right? Rather than, a kind of a huge thing. It's just, lots of small things make up a really great thing. Big part of what early signals is, right? Little bits in isolation mean nout, right? Getting up, making your bed means nout. Or getting up, making your bed, doing your breakfast, looking after the children, getting your wife a coffee, going to work on time. Those things all together create a really good kind of life, I think, I was talking about my mum just before. I think she deserves a bit of a thank you here, actually, right? Because I think I remember sitting in my room and like just not revising, right? And she'd be in that room every, honestly, 7 minutes, like just kind of checking what I was doing and what I was on. And she'd really focus me. I think without that structure, I wouldn't have got to where I am today because I'd have just flunked. I would. And I think if I just go back to that monitoring book just for just a second, right? That book or no book, I still didn't know how to not do those things. I didn't know how to not shout out. There was no, and in fact, it wasn't even about knowing, because even if I did know, I wouldn't have been able to stop, right? So,
I get it.
Handing in like a book like that, mate, at the start of every lesson, the end of every lesson, doesn't half get you noticed by your peers. Like, you just see it's different and weird and kind of, what's in that book sort of thing. I remember people nicking it and reading it out loud at break time to people. And like,
come on.
That's just grim, isn't it? And like, I wonder whether it looked to everyone like I just didn't care. But like the truth of the matter is I cared a great deal, arguably too much, but my ability and my performance were two completely separate things, mate.
Yeah. Well, there's two things there you've just said. First of all, is one that keeps popping up on this podcast, and I, I'm not the only person that's said it. Loads of people have said this, but you've just. So this is the '90s, right? To be
Yeah,
clear,
yeah.
yeah. You've just highlighted something there. First of all, you talked about your mum. Your mum coming in every 7 minutes, check-in. So your mum was never really able to be a mum. Your mum was a teacher, a reminder for you to do your homework, a reminder for you to revise. So that's the first thing that keeps popping on this podcast, that parents can't just be parents. Parents can't be mum and dad. They have to be scribers, readers, teachers, revision tools. So that's the first thing. And I guess just to quickly touch on you touched about like your peers there, and so did you, if you can think back, did you know you were struggling, or did you just think, well, this is who I am?
So that this was the biggest realization that I've had, mate, from coming on this pod, because I've had to have a think, right? You told me we're going to talk about, your youth and then your adult, right, and so on. And I've really thought about this. I think my behavior, right, led to people's expectations, which then fed into my identity, right? I think the way that I behaved, the way I went on, right, and that this goes up to kind of 35, by the way, right, lowered everyone's expectations of me, right? I remember
Yeah,
all the eye rolls. So all the eye rolls, I'd say something that would even be mildly interesting that was true, right? Because I'll be totally frank with you, mate, I was a massive storyteller, right? Because, you
yeah,
say something
yeah.
interesting and you feel great when people react to you. And the thing
No,
was
of
that's
course.
important there is it didn't matter how they reacted, whether it was positive or negative, they reacted. And that was what was important, right?
Mm,
And now I'm actually doing something genuinely interesting, right? I'm speaking to people who I never thought I'd be able to, be hanging in a room with. And I think now, for some people, even people really, really, really close to me, that eye roll is still there. And the huge problem is over time, you start to either believe your own hype or you start to live inside other people's expectations of you.
yeah,
For me, and for a long time, what people thought of us or think of me shape how I see myself. So I've just stopped asking and looking for it because it's
mm,
not good, but unfortunately I
yeah,
was always kind of unable to sort of help it. Like I never understood why it was always me, because it was always me. I just knew it always was. Like there's no one to blame. The 90s context does matter. The stigma was a thing. I remember there was a young lad in my class, call him M, back in primary school. He was on Ritalin. And I remember there was a day where he hadn't had his meds and everyone started calling him mental, right? And like quite
yeah.
kind of openly. And again, 90s, I was in my first primary school, first of two primary schools. I moved around quite a lot. And he must have been like 6, right? And like I remember kind of quite clearly people calling him mental because he was quite literally running around the dining hall and couldn't stop himself, right? Um, you know, so the 90s context does matter. I know that. I do wonder whether my parents whether they knew and just didn't kind of want the stigma attached. I understand that, fearing for your child's future in the 90s.
Probably not. Probably
Yeah.
not, mate. As daft as it sounds, you know, it's heartbreaking. And when I realised that I got bored, you just mentioned about like the eye rolling and this, that, and the other, right? Like, I think what you're doing is incredible, and we are going to come on to it. I promise you. The reason I do this back bit is for a couple of reasons. First of all, for people that listen, it's they may be on, like I said, the journey they're on with their children. They're at different stages, or they're at the end, or they're at the beginning, and they're probably going through what your mum went through with you, your parents went through with you, and my mum went through with me. And it's important for them to hear that what the child side of your memory. So when you've gone back, you said it was quite traumatic. It's interesting how many people have come on and kind of gone, shit, man, when I went back and got my report card or thought about this, it really affected me. And that is one of the most important things. And that's what I want to nip in the bud. And I love what you're going to tell us, because I think it rolls on for so long, your life, this feeling, this emotion, the word you use, mental, thick in my case, It's a horrible, horrible thing. And you know, I've always said as a child, I wish I'd just got a tattoo on my forehead saying, oh, I'm thick. It would have just been far easier for me to go through my school life. So, people didn't need to think I was thick or call me thick. The
Hmm.
teachers just knew that anyway, you
Yeah.
know. But it's breaking that mold, and it takes time, mate, to break what you think you are compared to what you actually are. You know, I told you this when we spoke. It took me years for me to put my hand up. Years, mate. 47, 45, I can't remember, years of my life. And I never asked the question because I just thought they're going to think, you're stupid, man. Don't ask that question. That's a really stupid question. Just don't ask it. And it could have been something like, hey, I don't actually understand how to do this. Could you just show me one more time? I was too scared to ask. So I understand what you're going through, but you need to give yourself credit for what you've created. And I can't wait for people to learn more about it. And yeah, thank you very much for talking about the past, mate. You said something to me when we spoke. I've actually written it down about ability and performance don't always match.
Hmm.
Uh, just what do you mean by that? Tell me a bit about it.
Yeah. So I keep on coming back to that, right? There are barriers in everybody's way, right? There are in everybody's way, every single person, whether that, I'm thinking about my class in kind of recent years, young person whose mum had passed away, right? That's a massive barrier, right? That young person isn't going to be performing at their best, right? But that doesn't mean that their ability has disappeared, right? They still have this absolute infinite ability, right? And that's kind of the case for everybody. I think for a heck of a long time, my ability was plateaued and was ceilinged, right?
Yeah,
Because I could never get much further than where I was at. And the thing was, mate, I haven't done too badly, you know? Despite everything, right? I look back at like the notes on my phone, like checklists and like little alarms and things like that. And people around us who've put up with it and who've kept me in line, like my best mate, Jack, right? My best mate, Jack, he would point out, he'd just give us a little nudge and go, is that true? And I'd be like, oh, no, it wasn't, man. And just, but like really in like a kind way, right? That's really important, not just bullshit. It was just kind of, that's why the people who are around you really matter. But no matter what it
mm,
is, the support has to be put in place for people to reach their full ability, right? I kept on thinking I'm smart when I was going through kind of adulthood, right? And when I started drinking and realizing I was probably about 16 years old, right? And started thinking, oh, hang on, everything's gone a bit quieter here. Oh, that feels good. Because it's immediate dopamine, right? Isn't it? Right? That's what I now understand. I did a lot of research, right? As soon as I kind of found out that it might be that. Um, you know, did a heck of a lot of research. And people gamble, they do drugs, they online shop, they binge eat, they crash diet, they excessively exercise, right? Whatever it might be, they do something which gets them that quick fix. And on some things, going to the gym, right, might be quite healthy. Some things like having multiple partners, for example, right, is a big problem. Gambling, big problem. Drugs, alcohol could
yeah,
become a really big problem. I think just kind of watching everyone else accelerate past you, right? When I know I'm working harder than a lot of them, not in terms of like output, right? But just getting by, right? Just like
yeah.
existing, right?
Just managing, just existing. Yeah,
Yeah, like, my mum and dad always laughed at us, and this was like in quite a nice way. I would go to bed at 8:30, you know, and like all my pals are going out and whatever else, and my mum and dad are watching, um, an IDV drama or whatever it might be, or stay up and watch it with us. And I'm knackered. I go to bed at like 8:30 as like a 20-year-old bloke or like a 19-year-old bloke. Go to bed at half. Mate, I was exhausted. You know, my brother then accelerates past us. Right, absolutely. Some
yeah,
brother's 4 years younger. I'm really proud of him. Right, he's done really, really, really well. Like sincerely, he's done very well in what he does. He's kind of excelling. Right, but I remember him kind of accelerating past me and going, I'm smart, man. Why can't I get past where I am? Right. And I just couldn't get any kind of further. And look, that's a skewed perspective anyway, right? I'm proud of my brother, right? I should never have thought like that. But I think you do. You compare yourself with others,
no,
don't
you
you?
do. Yeah,
You
of
just
course you do.
naturally sort
Yeah,
of do. And it was like, he's younger than me. He shouldn't be doing better than me, and so on and so forth. But that's kind of what I mean by ability and performance. But I mean, I ended up having to go somewhere that was really quite dark to get to where I am now. Do you know what I mean? It's like, what is it? Like the day's darkest before the dawn sort of thing. And mate, I'm telling you
Yeah, yeah,
now, we can talk about it a little bit if you like, but that was that hitting that floor was probably what I needed to do. And luckily I bounced, because I'm telling you now, mate, and I know from personal experience, there are people who don't bounce.
yeah. No. So when you left school, do you think life became harder because of the lack of structure of school? You mentioned there, you had to hit rock bottom. Do you think? I mean, were you making decisions, which were off skew, and what were your young adult years like?
Really impulsive, really
Yeah,
impulsive, and really kind of, I'm going to use substance as like a loose term, but drink and whatever, right? So
yeah, yeah,
really
yeah, yeah,
kind
yeah.
of geared around those things to make you just feel good, right? And just kind of give you that kind of that. I mean, it's just what I was saying before. Some people gamble, some people do drugs, some people do whatever. Mine was kind of around just, I don't know, social side of things, just kind of, and I quite liked it, because when I've had a few drinks, and I don't drink that much now, I'll still have a beer or two, but I
Mm,
don't have much to drink now, because it's I don't sort of need it. But you know, those sort of social situations where I'd be, that part in between tipsy and drunk, that sort of sweet spot. I wish you could just live there forever, but unfortunately, that's not how it works, right?
mm.
Particularly if
That's
you're like
true.
me and you go to excess every single time. I mean, I was the life and soul, then I would crash. Then I was life and soul,
Yeah,
then I would crash. But that cycle went on for kind of for years, really. Me and my best mate had the best time in my life. We went interrailing around Europe, and impulsive buying. I racked up 35 grand in 3 weeks, in debt. In debt. So yeah, I really good time and everything else. I'll never forget it. But that followed me for a long time. Obviously, right? I was like 19-year-old or 20-year-old or something. Then, I mean, I ended up muddling my way back into education again, because I'd left uni.
mm,
I left it, so I went to do a drama degree, because in my head at the time it was the easier option. It's not, for anyone kind of sitting here thinking doing a drama degree is an easy thing. God Almighty, you know.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Who's Piaget? Goodness me, I'm trying to think back about some of the kind of the practitioners and things that we studied. It's a hard kind of thing. The same as any expert in any sort of field. But I should have gone and done law in retrospect, right? I should have gone and continued law. But I took
Yeah.
the easy route for me, not the easy route, the easy one. Ended up going back in education. So I've done night classes to get myself through, because in the period where I dropped out, the UCAS points had all changed. So I could no longer get into uni. So then I had to go to night classes, became a teaching assistant, then I qualified. Get in, I've qualified. Oh my God, this is really hard. And it was really hard, high workload in that first school of mine, really high. And then had a breakup, gnashed off to Dubai to teach out there. Met my wife on day one. We met literally day one. And then COVID hits, and I'm a caged animal. Now,
Wow.
lockdown here was one thing, mate. Lockdown in the Middle East,
Yeah.
like literally trackers on your phone. Literally a tracker on your phone. It was really militant. People couldn't walk the dogs. You had to let your dog do the business on the balcony and things. Came home, and this is where it unravelled really badly for me, mate. So I'm not going to go into it for reasons you'll understand when I talk to you privately, but we had a really significant life event, okay,
Mm,
and that just made me pop. I think basically I was probably already at capacity. I was probably already full, but we had this significant life event, and I started kind of muddling my way through, and really struggling, pretending I was fine to people who, say, I didn't live with, say my mum
yeah.
and my gran and whoever. But the people who lived with us started really struggling with that as well, because I just ended up somewhere really dark, like really dark, and probably quite fortunate that I've got the network that I do, because you know it might not have ended quite as favourably, if I'm totally honest with you, mate. I ended up
Uh,
speaking to a clinician, and she went, "Have you ever thought about being screened for ADHD? go get a private assessment done. I think it's something worth looking at. Lo and behold, out of 18 criteria, 17, significant impairment to attention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. So all of the above, all of
So,
the ADHD.
so when you got that, was that relief? When someone told you that, I don't think I've ever asked anybody this question. Was that relief?
So the first conversation when she mentioned it, I was just kind of like, I just didn't, nah. And actually my mind went straight to people who were around us and just kind of, who probably aren't the most woke people, and it's just kind of, it's a generational thing, I guess. It's just kind of like, what a load of twaddle. That's where my mind first went. Load of rubbish.
Well, we're hearing more of that, right? And
Yeah.
we're going to hear a lot more, I think. And this is what scares me the most. But no, I get what you're saying.
But, she said it, and I started doing a little bit of research myself before I went and sought assessment. And the more I started reading, the more I just kind of went, oh God, I've got this thing. Like, there was just kind of no doubt in my mind at all. I sat with my friends and just kind of went, look at this list with me. And they were like, and it was,
did you go right back? I mean, did you kind of like, you mentioned at the beginning that when you thought about your childhood, it was quite traumatic. So when you got that, let's call it diagnosis or label, here's your leaflet for ADHD. Did you kind of think, shit, childhood? Did you go back and think about that as well, about the stuff you'd done in class and the way you were treated?
Yeah, I remember feeling like, I actually remember shouting down the stairs. Hey, I'm getting a bit upset actually. I remember sort of shouting down the stairs, like yes, like sort of like celebrating like I'd won something. And then I became quite sad because I was like, God, man, like I've lost a lot because someone didn't spot this thing. Do you know what I mean? And it's, again, I don't think it's any one person's fault, right? I really don't.
No.
It's we're operating within a broken system. Oh, sorry, that's unfair. A system that doesn't operate to optimum. Being told what was going on with me, I mean, that was then because I was still skeptical. And then the day I got my medication, my world pancaked, mate. Honestly, pancaked. Total 180-degree flip, and quickly, days.
See,
right? Like
Andy said this. And you mentioned Andy. Andy said this. So you are now the second person that's really, really kind of mentioned the fact that was it. It was like A and B, chalk and cheese.
It was like a light bulb. So bear in mind as well that I wasn't going to take any medication for it because if I tell you, if I was talking about that ended up somewhere dark place, right? Doctors were chucking every flipping, thought I was depressed, thought I was whatever, every single tablet. And then, I mean, I ended up with what they're thinking is medical withdrawal sort of issues, right? And because I just stopped taking them, right? So I'm not the biggest fan of medication, right? Got experience in my family where someone's had issues with medication that were kind of wrongly given as well. I'm not big. I don't take Anadin Extra, mate. So I was quite against taking the meds, but my God, I'm glad I did because, it gave me a why. It gave us like it's not an excuse for behaviors, right? It isn't. And there are times when I'm still impulsive, where I'm still kind of irritatingly so, and I'll kind of hone in on something, but I know why, right? It gives me a better chance to notice what's going on and act accordingly rather than just going, oh, that's how we are, ride the wave, Like,
is it giving you some clarity?
Oh, massive, huge. I think back to like, significant elements of my childhood, like big kind of things. Everyone's got them, that fight on the playground or that time when I did this or that time. And I said, the things that the core memories that you don't want to be there, but they are. I would attribute about 70% of them in some way, to this. A lot of the negative.
Incredible.
Which are I brought them on myself, right? Because a lot of them, it's my behavior that, made those events occur, right? But it didn't have to, and again, not one person's sort of fault, mate. But I've done quite a lot in 7 months, really 8 months, whatever we're up to. I've come quite a sort of a long way, and I'm coming into some kind of semblance of normality now. I'm probably quite obsessed with what I'm doing, but I'm obsessed with what I'm doing for good reason. I mean, so my wife's started asking me not to have my meetings with my earphones in so she can hear what's going on, right? And she can hear the conversations I'm having with, like, investors, with, authors, with, like, heads of local authorities, right? Like, people who I shouldn't, by right, in my head, I've still got this kind of view, right? I shouldn't be in the room with these people, but I am, right? And they're talking to me about kind of, market value and things like that. And now she's kind of going, you need to run with this, like, you're stupid if you don't, sort of thing, because it's a really big thing that we're trying to do, because the point's not perfection, right? It's all about peace for the young person, right? Progress for them, and giving them the possibility. Because actually, if we're not, for me, there was no possibility of getting any further than where I was. I was just there, and I was stuck, and I was at a wall, and there was no breaking that wall down, no matter how hard you tried, because you'd start hammering away at the wall, and then you'd see the next shiny thing, and you'd start doing that, so
Yeah,
that
I know.
you would just never be able to chip away at it,
Yeah, I want to just touch on teaching a bit,
hmm
for my own curiosity, really.
Yeah.
So knowing what you know and knowing what you've seen and what you've told us so far, you then stood in a classroom, right, in front of children. Is there parts of you that recognizes bits of yourself in these kids sometimes? Do you look at them and go, shit?
No question. Not a question. And there's loads of them. But here's
Worrying,
the
man.
important thing, right? Here's a really important thing about, and if anybody listening to this takes any one thing away from today, right? Don't listen to the sort of sob story about my childhood, right? You're not looking for the ones that are obvious, right? It's the ones who are absolutely fine, right? They're absolutely grand. Okay, they're the ones you're looking for. And that's why we're logging in early signals, which I'll talk about in a minute. The whole MO, right? The whole modus operandi is that we're not logging small, inconsequential, what seems like it might be irrelevant, but it might be a bit relevant, little signals, which then come together to form a big picture, right? Tiny things, Adam can't seem to stop shouting out today, right? That logged 3 years ago. If it's logged over time, that produces a pattern, right? If you then put that into the picture of he really struggles in group settings, and then you add that to something that mum said at the gate, and then you add it to blah blah blah, you got a really decent picture. And actually, a decent clinician, a very good Senko, or even, to be honest, any Senko worth their salt should be able to make a good inference from that picture. Right now, I want to be really kind of clear here. A really hard moral boundary for me on early signals is that we're non-diagnostic, right?
Okay.
Entirely so, right? That's my personal moral boundary. I've turned down 300 grand of investment because they said, well, actually, no, I think what you should be doing is integrating with the NHS and trying to diagnose, because I think that's a massive market.
No.
How can somebody use something like AI, a computer, to diagnose a social, spectrum disorder like autism, right? You can't, right? That's my hard line. I'll never do it. So, anyone kind of questioning whether I'm doing this for money and whatever else, I'm not, because I've just turned down 300 grand. Yeah, that's not where I'm at. I think what we don't have, though, is that system to be able to do that. Now, I've written an article the other day about safeguarding and what we can learn from safeguarding, right? CPOM's brilliant at what they do, right? For anyone who's not kind of familiar, it's a piece of safeguarding software which just helps you to log events, right, in child's life. So I use an example from when I was younger. There was a young lad came in and he said, my dad was smoking a really funny cigarette in the car. Right, so your head, right, alarm bells go off, right, and every single person who works with young people or anyone vulnerable, first thought is safeguarding. So fair play to the government of 1994 and slightly before, because now every single person who works with young people's brain goes straight to safeguarding, as it should, because that's priority one. Young person safe. Yeah. Now, the following week, something else was logged where dad's friend had come with a shoebox full of money. Right, those two things in isolation don't really mean anything. You put them together, and dad's selling cannabis, isn't he? Right? That's the sort of thing that I'm talking about, right? And that turned out to be the case. But we don't do that for SEND, right? We wait for it to hit the fan. We wait for young person's attainment to drop off the cliff. We wait for them to be self-harming or not eating or running away from home or, throwing chairs or whatever it is. And then we go, oh, sugar, we better do something for them, right? But actually, in the interim before that, and then when you speak to a teacher or the teacher from last year, you go, did you ever notice this? Oh yeah, he's been doing that for years. So what I did
It's
was,
bonkers. It's
whatever.
bonkers, man.
It's just not logged anywhere, right? People are having these
No.
kind of corridor conversations. Like, so I've spoken to quite a few people, and the two things I wanted to highlight was from a former head teacher, she's called Sarah Donnelly. She said, and I quote, that early SEND observations are rarely captured meaningfully. They're usually in corridor conversations. Staff turnover is quite high, so that information leaves with the teacher who's left, right?
Yeah,
Or
because
the
they
TA
move
who's
on,
left.
right? Of course.
Days gone forever, right? And the pattern across the journey gets lost. And then we spoke with Laura Waite, who was just down in Parliament talking about this very same thing. She's unbelievable, mate. She's from up here in the northeast of England. She's got SEND children adopted as well. And she said the families are repeating the same information to different people for years and years and years. Now, if a parent's having to repeat the same information to me, to next year's teacher, and that's telling you something, mate. That's getting lost every single time it comes through, every
Yeah.
single
It's
time.
frustrating, right? Because what you're kind of saying is the teacher knows there's a problem. The parent knows there's a problem. The SEND teacher may be seeing something else and they know there's a problem. The child knows there's a problem, right? There's a voice getting lost somewhere, isn't there?
Not just one, mate. And it's from all over the place. And also there's evidence in their books, right? There's evidence on in drawings that they've done. There's evidence from when they're on the playground. There's evidence from when they're in the dinner hall, right? All those things tell you different things. Any decent teacher will put things in place for those young people, whether they've given them a pencil grip or whether they're letting them have a walk before they do a big piece of writing, right? Whether that support put in place, because that's exactly what that is, even though it's small, right? Whether that worked, if it worked, it tells you something. If it didn't, it tells you something else, but it still tells you something, So we're going to intend to preserve all those. We intend, to preserve all those little snippets before they disappear. And it's not just for the kids who might end up with a diagnosis, for every single one. Because if we look at teaching standard 5, right, you need to be putting things in place to make sure that every young person's reaching their full potential. Like you're putting the right support in place to allow everyone to do as well as they can, right? Whether that is a pencil grip, whether it is a cuddle at the start of the day, whatever it might be, right? It's about making sure that you're putting those things in place for those people. I think right now, eventually some information gets to the SENCO. They're overworked. Then the SENCO has to reconstruct a picture from like over the last 3 years. So they then have to assimilate this information through having conversations, through whatever. So I was a little bit concerned about workload, right, with early signals, because what I didn't want to happen was that we take the SENCO's job and just foist it off on the teacher. That's not what I wanted to do. So I recruited someone called I hired, I suppose, someone called Carla Bowley. She runs something called the NDPP, which is an organisation looking at organisations' workload, right? She said she was initially worried that it was going to be duplicitous, right? So we were going to be, just as I said before, just pushing all of that work on the teacher. She did a concept stage review and she said, that wasn't the case. We're not doing it at all. In fact, we're lowering the SENCO's workload probably by hours and weeks and days, right? But while adding probably a few minutes of workload onto the teacher every day, which I think is a fair trade-off, considering it is literally a teacher standards. You should be doing these things anyway. And I think obviously you've got a lot of parents on this podcast, haven't you?
Yeah, loads.
Yeah. So one of the biggest groups of people I've spoken to is parents, because ultimately they're more important than me, right? It's their family at the end of the day, right? They're more important than what the school thinks. That's my view of it, right? You see what the school says is important, right? But what happens at home for their family and their family life is way more important than what happens in a classroom or GCSE results or whatever, right?
Of course, yeah.
Parents see what school can't, but schools see what parents don't, right?
Mm-hmm.
Both of those things can be true, right? At the moment, what seems to be happening is parents might be saying something and schools go, well, we don't see it here. And the same thing the other way around, right?
Do you just quickly on that? Do you think that the schools, don't really want to use that word, but don't know what other word I'm going to use it. Do you think the schools dismiss what the parents saying, maybe label them as being overly worried, even though they've been observing this shit for years, right? We both know it goes on because we've both been there as kids. Do you think some of that gets dismissed?
Right. I think dismissed is harsh, but I get where you're coming from. Right.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of human nature, right? You believe what you see, don't you? I think that's human
Yeah.
nature, right? If
Yeah,
there's no
yeah.
evidence for you, you struggle mentally to kind of compartmentalize and process that information, right? So that's another part of what we're trying to do, right? A
Okay.
family reaction I heard was, I kept honestly thinking I was crazy because I wasn't being believed, and I kept seeing this same behavior, and then schools are just kind of like, oh, right, okay. You know, eventually once, you know, you become desensitized to something. So if I say to you, you know, I'm thinking back to a young person once said for impact, I think, we're not certain, said, I'm going to commit suicide when I get home, right? And it became that was, wow, whoa, alarm bells, boom, boom, boom.
Of course.
But
Of
then
course.
it would happen quite a lot, right? And it would be, you know, we think it became a little bit of a kind of work avoidance strategy for that young person, right? And I, as trained as I am, and in as fantastic a setting as I am, you become desensitized to that little snippet of information, which you never should, right? So that then kind of happens for staff as well. You know, if a parent is coming and repeatedly saying the same things, it just kind of rolls off. So
It's like
I think what's
what's that
really
story?
important.
What's that? Is the boy who cried wolf? Is it or something like
Yeah,
that? Where
I
you say the
suppose.
same thing and it gets Okay. I
Yeah,
can see what you mean, and yeah, and dismissed probably wasn't the right word, but I
yeah.
wasn't sure. You know what
I
I meant
just
though, right?
I just think that's kind of the way that we need to think of it is, and the really important thing is everyone cares, right?
Yeah, no, totally, of
School
course.
cares,
Just from different
parents care.
angles, right?
Yeah, it's just
Different.
you're just looking at it from a different lens, right? So here's what I proposed was initially, right? I proposed to the parents. I went, here's what I want to happen. I would like parents to be able to log blah 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 blah.
So
What?
just quickly then, do this. Let's do the parent angle first, right?
Mhm.
So nobody on here, nobody apart from me and you, knows what this is. So do the parent side first. Tell the parents what you're trying to solve for them first.
Mhm. So I want parents and schools and the young person and professionals to be on an equal footing with the child in the center, right? That's the most important thing, right? Everything is geared around the young person, right? All of that context, no matter whether they agree, no matter whether they speak to each other, is evidence of that young person, right? If mum says that young person is jumping out the window, right, at home, but that behavior isn't perceived at school, that is totally irrelevant, right? The fact that those things are unequal or aren't happening in different settings is irrelevant, right? We're not going to flatten the information and try and get it to sit nice and neatly together, right? The thing that we need to be doing is preserving all of as much as possible, right, of that young person, right? So that then a designated professional, usually the SENCO or the inclusion lead, can look at it and go, there's a rabbit away there. Let's have a little bit of a look, right? Because at the
Okay.
moment, if they don't have that information, what are they looking at? Right? They're looking at the
Exactly.
big event that eventually hits home, or they're looking at the big communications that have to happen between home and school and professionals and whomever, right? All of a sudden, though, if you've got that kind of chronology of a young person, and we've in consultancy with people, we've said, you know, what would make this information the most usable for you? And some people have said they'd want it across a timeline. Some people have said they'd want to be able to see the whole picture. So we've done it all, right? We've
Okay.
done it all. We've just given
Interesting.
everyone lots of different ways to use the same pieces of information, right? But what's really important for mum and teacher and young person is it doesn't automatically decide who's right, right? It's human review. But what it does is it'll add a layer of visibility to that young person, right? Different environments, different presentation. And then a SENCO could infer whatever, right? For example, if a young person is brilliant at school, lovely, placid, docile, and then 4 o'clock every day kicks off at home, that to me as a SEND professional says, right, that young person's masking at school all day, struggling all day, and then popping when they get to their safe place, right?
Yeah.
The system won't tell you that, but it will give you the information to reliably be able to make that decision.
So what you're doing then, in simple terms for me, is you're taking pieces of information, observations, right? Observation, 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 observation. You're putting them all into one structured review review ready document, if you like. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
Wow.
we've moved away from the term review ready, right? So originally, right, we were called an intelligence readiness system, right?
Okay.
What I didn't want to do is I want to preserve as much, if not all, of the professional's judgment as possible. What I don't want a system doing is going, flagging up saying, "Oh, we've got that, we've got that, we've got that. Oh, but we don't have all this, so I'm not going to refer." We don't want them thinking, "I'm not going to refer." The Senko or the inclusion lead's head should be going, "I've got a feeling here, in my professional judgment, this." So what we're going to do is we're going to say, "Here's what we do have, right? Here's what we don't. You might want to find those things, and that'll be down to the professional." Okay, but we've moved away from readiness, right? And that's come from a lot of the challenge. Not a lot of the challenge. It came from one challenge conversation that I had with our core team of kind of 9, who were absolutely phenomenally credentialed for the record. I think if I was to go back to what we were saying about the kind of the masking element of things, there was this study in Durham Uni done 2023, so it's relatively recent, and it's shown that 35% of the identified SEND population are girls, right? So that's quite a big discrepancy between male and female, right? There is a
Yeah.
massive identification gap in girls, and we're trying to figure out that issue because there's a huge study which sort of shows one of the things that we need to be conscious of is that difficulties aren't always externally visible. It's not always kind of stimming or shouting out or whatever. A lot of the time, particularly in girls, it appears to be the case that it's internalized, right?
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
someone who's very close to me who's just been writing her masters, and I work very closely with her. She's a superb practitioner. And I started talking to her about this, and she went, "You're not going to believe what my thesis is. It's all about masking in girls and early identification." And I was like, when things kind of fall into place. And she's been a really big support for me, by the way.
Good.
But, there was that kind of Coke can analogy of, this young person is sat at school, male or female. That's not necessarily the point here, although it is more prevalent in girls, and they're fizzing up all day, and then they get home and bang,
Yeah.
you know.
Bang. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the disagreement is actually the useful bit here, right? That's really important here. It's not that school and home align. That difference is what's important in this particular situation. So we need to be preserving that, right? And,
Okay.
we want to be able to include the young person in this conversation. I'm not going to pretend that we've cracked that yet. We're still working with, is it the CDC, the Council for Children, CCD, the Council for Children with Disabilities, and they're supporting us with how to collect the pupil voice here, because these are quite big conversations. I mean, someone who's 14 might be able to access a conversation around where they're struggling. And then I'm thinking about some of the young people I currently work with, and that would be a massive triggering event for them.
Yeah.
So
It would have been. It would have been for me if you'd have asked me that as a kid. You wouldn't have got anything out of me, mate. Honestly, I just thought, as I said to you earlier, did you just think it was you? It was just who you are. So maybe I would have probably told you that. That's just who I am. So okay. I want to challenge you a bit here, right? I would say, well, I wouldn't say I know. I know that over 60% of our listeners are parents, right? High percentage of those 60% are female. I'm guessing they're probably mums. There are also a lot of educators, a lot of teachers, heads that listen to this. They're probably listening now and they're going, come on, Jesus, man, I'm drowned in forms, evidence, assessments, admin, meetings. Here comes Adam. Oh, yeah, here's another system. Like, is that going to create more work for them?
It's a good question. So this is why we brought Carla on board, right? This is why I literally, because everything I've done, because I'm doing quite well here, but I'm limited, right? I can't do everything. I can't be all things to all men, right? So, Sarah Alston came on board, who's a wonderful author. She's the author of the Inclusive Classroom. Lynn Howe came on board, who is an incredible SEND consultant. If there's any SENCOs listening, you'll be in our Facebook group, the Sweary SENCO, I would imagine. These people are kind of really well credentialed in their area. So I lean on them, right? I clarify things. Okay. So Carla Bowley from NDPP, she's the person who we went to about workload. And I showed her everything, right? And I went, I want you to tear it apart, right? So the basic system of it is, just so that everyone kind of gets a flavor, is that someone notices something small, right? A teacher, a TA, whomever that might be, parent, right? They would open their device, their iPad, the phone, whatever it might be, and they'd create something called an I notice. They'd speak or text into the agent, and that agent will then clarify what that person means. And we're going to elicit expert level understanding from a non-expert. The same way that a clinician might get that information from you before a session with a young person. Okay. Iris, our AI, will then clarify that information. The contributor then checks that they're happy with what was said. They'll humanly review it because that's important, right? We don't let the AI decide, human decides. That then becomes evidence. Then those pieces come together to create our picture, as we've already spoken about before. The SENCO can then use it to create their EHCP, their ISP, their EHCNA, what have you. All right. Is it more work? From Carla, who we asked to honestly rip at the bits. I want to know where this breaks now so I can fix it before I go into schools. So we were aiming at around 90 seconds per piece of login. And when we've spoken to teachers, that seems fair and reasonable. Okay. At the moment, because I'm building this thing, at the moment, I'm sitting at about 2 minutes. We're getting there, right? We're getting there. We want it, though, to be captured while the context's fresh. That's why we want it to be so quick.
I
right?
like
Means
that.
less remembering, less chasing, less reconstruction to be done later. The teacher can obviously pause and say, I need to log this after class, and we'll send them an alert. All right. You started this, you need to log it later. Yeah. Carla, after the walkthrough, and I'm going to quote her, if that's okay with you. So her initial concern was that SENCO workload was just going to be transferred onto everyone else. She said, I don't see that you're doubling up with work at all in any kind of way, because you are literally asking somebody to simply voice record what they've already taken into their head. She said, I feel like your roles are still set roles in the sense of the teacher doesn't need to do more than what the teacher needs to do anyway. And the SENCO also doesn't need to do more.
Good. Okay.
So that's from an independent report, right? That's not someone I've brought on board. It's not someone on the team. It's someone who we've sort of seconded to come on board. I mean, there's a professional responsibility here regardless, right? Teachers are already expected to adapt their teaching to the strengths and needs of their pupils. I'm not adding an extra responsibility. I'm just saying, instead of having a chat about it in the staff room, which we do, right?
Just log it.
Log it. Or say, if you're teaching, right? Hello, Mr. Giddens. I know you're busy with Jack. You say to your TA, for example, I'm just teaching. Did you see that there? Would you mind just going and logging that with Iris, please? Pop outside, do the sniff.
I like the fact that it's not one of the things that pisses me off at the moment is like, what's the word I want to use? Another box ticking exercise. I like the fact that this isn't that, mate. I like the fact that the majority of people could quickly pick that up and go, yeah, I've just noticed Adam's doing this. It's simple. It's not loads of extra work, mate. I think that's brilliant. Okay, so here's the next thing. Again, I'm challenging you again here. Where's the evidence? What have you seen that makes you think this works or makes you believe this works?
I'm so pleased you've asked that question, right? So I've got 73 in-depth structured responses, right? In terms of, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, here's my proposed workflow. So show them the screen, so on and so forth. There were teachers, SENCOs, inclusion leads, CEOs, local authority heads, occupational therapists, speech and language therapists, EPs, safeguarding advisors, academic, I could go on, right? From that, we then had 100+ hours of conversations with myself separately, right? I collated all the evidence and we ran. Of that, 93% of our professionals and specialists within SEND, so that's all your clinicians, all of your SEND teachers and SENCOs and whatever else, recognize that there's a problem, right? That what I'm discussing is a problem. In terms of my solutions, in terms of early signals, 89% of them rated the direction either useful or very useful out of a sort of a sliding scale.
It's nice, mate. Nice figures.
Leaders that we spoke to rate the strategic problem. So you're talking Ofsted, you're talking the white paper, you're talking the direction of travel. 86% of them said that it's going to be a strategic headache for them and that this would be a solution. Here's my most important thing, right? 95% of those people, of the professionals, said that they wanted to help. They wanted to support. They wanted to help me build this thing. 95.
That tells you something then. That tells you something, mate, doesn't it? What about parents? Have you had any feedback from parents? I know it's early days yet, but have you had any feedback from parents? Yeah,
there's a percentage that's there that I don't like. It's an odd one. I don't like saying it because it makes it sound like bollocks. 100% of parents who I spoke to said that it's a big problem and that this would be a solution to their kind of headache, simply because it puts them on an equal footing. You know,
Yeah,
there are some dynamics where the parent is more in control or the school is more in control, right? And that depends
absolutely.
on the parent, it depends on the school, it depends on the SENCO, right? But none of that's relevant which way around it is. It just needs to be here, man. It just needs to be kind of solid. And what's happened materially. So last night, on Friday, I went live with the pilot interest form. Right? Didn't really advertise. I stuck it up in a Facebook group, right? There was 444 bits that have come in as of yesterday. I've now got several pilots schools, from Friday. I now have several letters of intent to buy. I now have people who want to contribute. In fact, people are now chasing me because when I'm going back to them saying I've got my pilot skills now, or I have certain pilot skills. What I am still looking for, if anyone is listening to this, I'm still looking for nurseries. I'm still looking for local authorities because I want to see if there's a capacity where actually if you run that out across a local authority, then does the communication between everywhere get better rather than just this school has it and this school doesn't.
Yeah.
Does it get used? Does it actually help? Does the workload, even though we've spoken about it hypothetically with Carla, it hasn't been tested in schools. So that's the evidence that we need next. So we're looking to get the controlled testing done. There is an element of freeness for that, because if you're helping us, we will let you use the software for free during that period. And our founding schools as well will get a preferential founding sort of pilot rate for 5 years, I've decided on. So, I mean, now that's going into the world. So now I've got to stick to it, right? Because that's now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, everyone knows that now, mate. Yeah, it's out there. So it's all really shit then, really, isn't it? It's not working at all, really. It's really bad feedback, really bad scores, and terrible.
Do you know something, mate? I keep on going back to the eye roll. Do you know what I mean?
All right then. Okay. All right then. All right. So I wasn't going to ask you this, but I'm going to now. As soon as you just said that, I've only ever had two. You're my second founder on. First founder we had on was Ingrid and Erica from Neuroline. That was my second ever podcast, which was nearly 18 months ago. So you're the second founder, and I didn't ask this to them, but I'm going to ask it to you. And I'll tell you what, every other to make you feel better, every other founder that comes on after you is going to get asked this as well. What hasn't worked? You said the eye roll. What hasn't worked? Anything?
Do you mean in terms of what I'm doing right now? What hasn't been working?
Yeah. What do you think you may have? What do you think you may have got wrong? You need to tweak, or are you just like thinking to yourself? You said the eye roll. Are you thinking to yourself, this all feels too good to be true, man?
Yeah.
I've just got this bang on.
I shouldn't have spoke about it. That's what I shouldn't have done, because there are people who are around me who are like, wind your neck in. It's your dream. The words "you're dreaming" are what came to me.
Nah,
but then I go on and I have a conversation with an investor.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not dreaming.
No, listen.
I still think
it was a trick question. It was a trick question because you said the eye roll. I'm trying to make you believe in yourself, mate. You've got nothing wrong. The fact, I know stuff that you've told me, and I'm not going to say it because it's confidential. But some of the stuff that you're telling me, and the people that are interested in this, and the things that you've got lined up for this, mate. The most important thing that I want to see is I want kids to be kids and be confident. The greatest gift you can give a kid is to be confident, right? Fact, right? You shouldn't have to go through school. You said it. I'm not going to use broken. It's a linear system. It's not designed for people like you and I, right? There needs to be some way of an early signal to find out, hey, this child, this is what's going on here, right? That's the first thing. The second thing that I think that you're solving, and you don't even know this yet, you're going to let mum and dad become mum and dad again, mate. Yeah. And that is a massive, massive thing. There are so many parents that are on the edge. And I have had people reach, you mentioned like the child that was crying wolf. I've had parents reach out to me and say, listen, we're on the verge of divorce. I can't cope anymore. I'm at the doctors with depression. Like, it's got to stop, man. So that's the second thing you're solving, right? And it was a trick question, and you've done nothing wrong. You're brilliant. don't stop, keep going, right? I'm telling you now,
Yeah. Well,
like
I mean,
everyone will love it, mate.
yeah, I mean, look, to be able to do that, so I'll let you know. I know that we're probably coming up to time. So I suppose where I'm at now, Jay, right? I'm wearing a lot of hats, right? I'm a full-time teacher, right? I've had the 6 weeks. So as we're recording this, it's you know, 8 o'clock at night on the 25th, right? 25th of August. So I'll be back to school full-time in September. So I've had 5 weeks to really have a good crack at this, thanks to the support of my other half, right? I'm a dad, 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, right? I'm building the product myself. I'm developing the product myself. I'm doing the marketing. I'm planning for September. I'm networking. I'm fundraising. I'm project managing, learning, and coordinating people that, frankly, are much cleverer than me, right? In every sense of the word, right? It's been a slog. I'm tired, but it's clearly showing results, right? So here's where I am now, right? And this is a bit of an ask. All right, this is a bit of an ask. I'm actually looking right now for, and this is important, aligned angel investment, right? So if there's anyone who's listening who wants to be involved in this in some capacity, right, and is wanting to invest in something that I do genuinely think, and I'm going to quote Sarah Alston here, right? This could be game changing for SEND in the way that safeguarding has been by CPOMs, right? Now, Sarah Alston is no slouch, right? She is a safeguarding queen, right? She's written about it extensively. That validation is probably the most important piece I've had, right? But it's not chasing, like I was talking to you earlier on about chasing validation. It's not about meaningful little snippets. That is from a real person whose credentials are really worth some listening to, So we're looking for these aligned angel investors. So whether you have an interest in SEND, whether you're a school governor, right? Whether you might be interested in some way in ed tech, right? I don't need investment to make the thing prettier. What I need it for is to give myself the full capacity to give it the respect and the attention that it deserves, and that we can prove that governance really to get us into schools safely, because that's an expensive thing. Now, obviously, I'm in a lot of conversations with a lot of investors, but what I won't do is compromise my core values for a check, ever. Right. Good. So hopefully if there's someone out there that's listening that can empathize with what I've just said, right, that actually it's the outcomes that matter more than, the remuneration. Because ultimately, if we are doing the right thing, if we're hitting schools in the head because we're helping them do what they need to do, we're hitting families and young people in the heart because we're doing the right thing by them, then ultimately we're directly going to impact an investor's wallet in a positive way. So that's sort of where we are, Jay. And I thought I'd sneak that in because I've got to.
No, it's good. It's good. I'm going to put all your details in the bottom of the podcast anyway. So a couple of things left to do. So a couple of quick fire questions and then the closing question, right? So I don't want you to overthink this. Right? I've done this a few times. It's proved really popular, and a lot of people listen to the poll and they want it back. So they're quick fire questions. Don't overthink of it. First thing that comes into your head, right? Most underrated quality?
Kindness.
Favorite book?
Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire.
Interesting. Biggest myth about ADHD?
That you're 100% energetic all the time.
Yeah, very true. Biggest myth about education?
It works.
One thing that every parent should stop worrying about?
The end points and results.
Good. Okay, this one's for you, right? One thing that every teacher should hear.
You're doing all right.
Okay. Mate,
I was going to keep talking there, but actually I think that's powerful enough. Yeah, you're doing all right.
It is. Right. Everyone gets this closing question, and I'm really excited for you to answer this, mate, knowing what I know about you and the way you think. So, you're on a podcast, Thick No More. It's called Thick No More because it's aimed at me. What does the statement Thick No More mean to you?
It's a good question. I never really thought I was thick, so it's a tough one, right? More for me, it's more about potential and never being able to kind of reach it. I think back to that lad on the monitoring book. It was the same behaviour, the same conversations, and nothing was done. And eventually he believes that you're thick, or you believe that you're unable, or you believe that you're incapable. But we keep coming back to this point, Jay, and it's about ability does not equal your performance. So we need to be looking beyond behaviour. You know, people in my life now are still carrying that version of me around, right? They're still looking at me right now as that guy, right?
Yeah.
That diagnosis gave me a reason and understanding. You know, the support doesn't need to wait for a diagnosis. So for me, thick no more isn't about confusing what someone produces with what they're actually able to do, what they're actually capable of. It's about looking beyond that, giving the right human a better chance to understand them. That's what I want for young people, because I know now that what some of my pieces meant when you put them together, I just wish that someone had been able to do it a bit earlier, mate. Yeah. So that's what thick no more means.
Thank you for that. No, it's a good way of framing it. I think what you've taught, I want to thank you, because I think what you've talked about today is, for me, is really important. You know, we've both been there. You know, the signs are there before the label, or they just are, right? You get the label after, you get the leaflet that says, oh, you know, congratulations, you're ADHD. but the signs were already there, right? And I wish and I hope that that people can start noticing this before that. We should be. Technology's there to do it. You've proved it. So, you know, it's about joining the dots up and going, hey, there it is. There it is, you know. So thank you. I can't thank you enough for coming on. I wish you the best of luck. I think, no. Honestly, I think it's an incredible product. I think it's incredible what you're doing. You're an incredible guy. Don't stop. And listen, guys, if anybody wants to reach out to Adam, I'm going to put his details below in the podcast. Feel free to reach out to him, you know, and it's super important for both of us. If you're a parent, a teacher, an educator, whatever it might be, and you know that this will resonate with someone, please share it with them, because it's important. All right, Adam, thank you very much. The best of luck, my friend.
Thank you. Listen, cheers. Thank you so much for having me on. I think what you're doing is brilliant, by the way, and I appreciate you just as a guy. I think you're a great guy. Thank you.
Thank you, buddy.